Welcome to the Pearls of Wisdom podcast, brought to you by Southern Jewelry News and Jewelry Store Marketers. Hey, how you doing? This is Guy with Jewelry Store Marketers. I'm here at the Atlanta Jewelry Show. We're here having a great time, and we're here with Chuck Kaler with Anthony Jewelers. As always, always a pleasure having Chuck
Love being here
on the podcast. And today we have David Siminski with United Precious Metal Refining.
Great to be here.
Kind of a mouthful, but I'm glad to have you. Glad to seen you around a bunch of times, and glad to have you on the show. Mm-hmm. So,
all right. So, Dave, what I want to let people understand, because refining is it's like buying a car. You just don't know what's happening back there behind the scenes. And I was fortunate because a couple of years ago, I had the opportunity to take a tour. And so I saw how it's done. So what we're going to talk about here is when you send your scrap to a refiner, or specifically your refiner, how do you know the settlement's fair? Because we've all heard the horror stories. That how do you know the settlement is fair, and how do you handle this? So when I went, that you send in all of your carroted scrap, and then y'all took it out of the box and put it in a 5-gallon bucket with a ticket. And then there was this long row of crucibles that had flames underneath them, and you poured your stuff, or like my stuff and only my stuff, in a crucible and melted it. And so everything in that crucible was only mine. So we melted into a blob. What happens next?
Okay, so the first thing, I'll just back up 2 steps from that. The first thing is when the material comes in, what happens, everyone obviously has their account number and all that stuff. So what we do is we'll weigh it up, we'll verify the weights of what the customer said. So a lot of times the customer will also include on their paperwork how much 10 karat they had or 14 or the overall weight. So the first thing we do is we'll verify the weights. Okay, if they're right on, then we move it forward. If there's a discrepancy, we'll call the customer back just in case there's an issue that somebody pulled out a ring, or to make sure our scales line up together. So we want to alleviate that part of an issue if there's a problem. So once it basically all the weights check out, what we'll do is when we weigh it up, and we'll assign it like a tag number, what we'll do is we'll remove the customer's name off of it and we assign it a number. So there's only certain people, so that as your material flows through the building, it stays with the number. They don't know it's Chuck's jewelry. They just know it's 1576. So they don't have any idea. And then at the end of the process, only certain people know that Chuck's jewelry is number 156, okay. And then we'll match it back up. And that's for security reasons, okay? So now what happens is it goes back to the refining portion, where the metal can be melted via gas in a crucible or electric. There's 2 different ways. You can do it by gas or electric, depending. No difference really. It's really just on the capacity. So really what we're doing is we're going to melt that. We're going to melt that into a crucible, into molten metal. We're going to take a glass rod, and we're going to stick it in the molten metal. And we're literally going to pull out a sample. That metal will freeze in the glass rod, so it will solidify. So then what we'll do is, after we have that pin sample, it's called a pin sample, then we're going to pour what's in that crucible into an ingot. So really we're going to make a bar. We're going to take that jewelry scrap and we're going to make a bar.
Okay, so now just to clarify, all of the stuff that a customer sends you, it goes into its own individual crucible, and then you take a sample of that and then pour it in, and the customer still owns it at this point, right?
That is correct.
Ownership has not changed.
Ownership is still their ownership at that point.
Okay.
So what happens is, what we're going to do is we're going to weigh the bar, and we're going to weigh the pin. So what happens, we know what happens is that when that scrap came in, you might have had pieces in there and other things. So what happens is the weight, you might have sent us, let's say 10 ounces. We did the bar, and the bar might come out, let's say 9.5 ounces. Because when we melt certain metals, that lower point metals in the alloys, like the zinc, it will dissipate.
Yeah.
Basically it will really just disappear. It's a lower temperature, so we won't have it anymore. So then you basically have a 9.5 ounce bar. So now what happens, we have the pin sample, we have the bar.
But even if some of the metals dissipated, that all of their stuff was completely isolated from anything else.
Correct, because precious metals doesn't, right. And what happens, every lot is individually done. So it's not like a big batch. We'll get to the batch portion and more into this, but everything's done individually because we're pulling a sample. The sample is going to tell us exactly what's in your bar, what's actually in your jewelry scrap. So at that point, what happens is we're going to take that bar, we're going to put it in its own label, its own container, and we're going to put it in the vault. And now what happens, we're going to take that pin sample, we're going to take it over to our analytical department. where basically we're going to take that pin. Now we're going to do a mini refining lot on that pin. We're going to cut a little piece of that pin off. We're going to put it in a ceramic coupelle with a lead apron, and then we're going to bake it for almost like 6 to 8 hours. What's going to happen is all those base metals, the copper, the zinc, the nickel, the silicon, is really going to be absorbed by that lead apron and absorbed into that ceramic little coupelle. And the only thing that's going to be left is a little gold bead. What that gold bead is going to be pure gold. It's going to be pure gold. So what happens is at that point, we know exactly what the pin sample weighed and the sample that we cut. So then from that standpoint, we know exactly the percentage. We know the gold's pure. So we can take that and we times it by the bar weight that we have so we can know what the gold is. The silver we do by mathematical difference. Every lot at United, we will also take that pin sample. We will check with X-ray and ICP for any platinum or palladium. Because really it's 4 metals you're looking for from a refinery. Gold, silver, platinum, palladium. Those are the precious metals.
Okay.
So after that analytics is done, okay, now comes the paperwork portion. Our analytical department's going to put in, okay, lot 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 had this much gold, this much silver in a percentage. Then what happens, we know what happens is with the bar weighed, and now we figured out exactly how much value is there. We have the percentage of gold, the percentage of silver, the percentage of platinum or palladium, and then what happens is we'll put it on paper, and then what happens is we know the bar weight, and then we'll do the settlement portion of it. The settlement portion is then after that, we see what happens is what today's market is, the gold market or whatever, the gold market, silver, platinum, and palladium. We'll fill out the paperwork, and then what happens, we give it to our salespeople, our inside salespeople, and we'll call the customer. We'll tell the customer at that point, your bar was worth, let's say, $15,000, okay? Now what happens is the customer will either approve the lot, okay, and say, that's what I want, that's what I expected, and then what happens at that point, we would settle, and then what happens is at that point, once the customer gives his approval.
Okay, well, let's stop right there first. What if the customer doesn't approve? What if the customer, because as we talked about earlier, it's all about expectation, that everybody that sends their gold in thinks it's worth more than what it's probably worth. I've been surprised twice in my life with my settlement where I was like, really? So at this point now, you don't own this gold yet. The customer still owns it. So that's something I want everybody to know, that all of your material, you still actually own.
That's correct.
That ownership has not changed hands. So let's go from the standpoint of, what if they say, no, I don't believe that. I think it's worth more than that. What if they want to get out of this deal? Now, remember, you can't unmelt it, but you still own the material. So what happens if somebody wants a second opinion?
There's 3 different avenues we could take. One is what happens is we can go through it and go through their paperwork of what their expectations and how they came up with their expectations of what they want or what they thought was in there.
Because you're pretty accurate on your.
Yes, because we're using science. Mm-hmm. So basically, like I tell people all the time, we're just the report card.
Right.
We're using pure science to do this.
And I've been in their lab and saw how this happened, and trust me, it's science in there.
So we're using science, and like I tell people, we're the report card. So at this point, what happens is okay, we'll go through the customer paperwork, and if we can't handle it that way, we'll say, you know what? We'll give you a sample of the pin. Take that pin and send it off to an independent lab, okay? Because the pin matches up with the bar. So what happens is we'll hold it. You can then send your pin sample out.
Yeah, because the product that you melted in its own individual crucible, it sits there and rocks on that little thing. Yeah. So it's fully homogenized.
Right. So it's a bar right there. So yes, and that's really what it is. It's like when you're melting gold, that's the whole point. Stirring it, agitating it to get a homogeneous sample of the entire unit, of the entire sample.
Wow, yeah.
So now what happens is at this point, we clip a sector of the pin, you can send it to an independent lab and see what they come back. And they said, okay, if basically an independent lab comes back with the same numbers, which 99% of the time they do.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, if there's an issue where the independent lab didn't, I said, okay, and we can't come to an agreement, this is what we think it's worth. At that point, what happens is we will just return everything to you. It's still your metal, your bar, and all that stuff. It's just not the jewelry scrap in a plastic bag anymore. We're just gonna ask you to cover the cost of what we put into it when it comes to the melting and the analytical. And if you feel that you could send it somewhere else as a second opinion, you can do that.
Okay, so all right, so they agree and they say, okay, I like the settlement. So now ownership changes hands, and now you own that bar. So now you take that bar from what I remember and you throw it into a big bin with all of the other bars that you've settled on. And then once you get a certain amount of them, and it was a big bin.
Yep.
Then you actually do the refining lot on it, and that's where you start actually reducing or separating all of the metals and turning it into, because once you get the settlement, you said that's 25% of the process.
Yeah, so once you get the settlement from a refining lot and you've gotten paid, it's only 25% of the work has been done. It takes us another 75%, or I would almost say an additional 7 to 10 days to actually turn it back to pure gold. It has to go through what I call the aqua regia process, which is the refining process, where you're separating the zinc, the nickel, the copper. So you're really doing another instead of that little refining lot you did for the assay sample, you're going to do a whole other refining lot for us to make it back to 24
you're
karat.
doing like 1,000 bars of people that
Oh,
you've
sure.
settled
So
on.
the most lots, when we do a lot that comes out of the bowl, let's say, and we're pouring it and we finally finish it, it's usually about a $2 million beaker. So you have like a beaker, that giant beaker, and it's filled with, and then when fine gold comes out of the refining process, it looks like sand. It actually looks like sand. So it doesn't look like beads or anything. Like it comes in like pure carat, and then from that point, we'll melt it and make it into shot, bars, casting grain products for the jewelry industry.
Well, years ago when we did the tour, Elisa and I went into the gold room when it was done, and y'all had a barrel about this big around and about this tall, and y'all specifically made it for that day to have exactly $1 million worth of gold in there. And it weighed out to $1 million, and you could just run your hands. And Elisa, you should have seen her. She's just like, because it's just, gold grain. It was like sand.
Yes.
It was just pure gold.
But we made her wash her hands really well before she left.
Over a certain sink with a collection
Right, for the
trap.
sink traps. So it's like, listen, I tell people when it comes to refining, there's no waste in precious metals. You as a bench jeweler for all those years also,
we
there's
don't
no
waste them. So
Don't waste.
And that's just our timer saying that we're almost done here.
Yeah.
But you know what I think is interesting is that now so many people, and I was fortunate that I actually got to take a tour and go from one to the other. And what's the one room where everything's rusted?
Everything what?
Is rusted.
Oh,
Like the pliers and the screwdrivers.
Oh, so what happens? That's a lot of times that is the what I call the wet lab. So not only do we do the stone removal portion when you're taking the stones out of jewelry, but also when we're making the fine gold. It's all acid and chemicals, to be honest with you. So what happens is everything really it corrodes. So the whole process corrodes everything. So that's why we have to have scrubbers. And so when you're a refinery, you have to have so much environmental stuff with, because we have to adhere to all the regulations that we have to make sure it's all about water. Because you have to use water for the process.
Yeah.
The water that comes into the building, as clean as it comes in, is as clean as it goes out. So for our place, what Chuck saw is like, we also have not our wet lab, but we have a wastewater treatment plant in the facility to make sure it treats all those chemicals, make sure it properly disposes of them, so we can get back to water going in to dispose.
And for anybody else that wants to take a tour, the answer is no. That when we did that tour, it was a conference we were at, and we were told that this was the first and only tour they've ever given of the building. And what was interesting was it took a long time to pass security to get into the building, and it took longer to pass security getting out of the building. So it's very highly secure, but I like this because now I hope people have an understanding that when you send something to a refiner, that there are checks and balances, and if you don't like the settlement, you get all of your stuff back. Like I said, you can't unmelt it, but 100% of what you sent is right there. But like I say, it's just one of those that, and it's almost like we get accused, or maybe it's a wives' tale, an urban legend about, somebody switched to diamond. And I'm like going, why would I do that? I see diamonds all day, every day. It's just one of those things that it's what we do. And when you send your refining to United Precious Metals, it is secure and as accurate and scientifically proven as it can possibly be, and your settlement will be 100% of what it should be. Regardless of the expectations, you're going to get 100% of what you sent in.
Yes, and I thank you so much for those kind words. One thing about the jewelry industry, it's large, but it's small. So, and on our business, we have no contracts. Our first lot is our last lot. So when we gain a customer, what happens is he has the right to, he's not locked into using us. He's only going to use us over and over again if we hit his expectations. Right. So when he does have questions, whatever the questions may be, we're able to answer them forthright. He appreciates the answer. He knows the answer it's legitimate and all that stuff. That's really what it's about. So we're never locked in. So we have to work hard on every refining line, no matter if it's a customer that's 30 years with us or 3 months with us.
Yeah.
Good.
Dave, I'm curious. I could hear a lot of passion and experience from your voice and what you say and how you describe the process. What's the best part of this process? What's the best part of this business for you?
I think the best
from a retailer, getting the check from the refiner.
There you go. Right.
That's my favorite part.
And listen, it's almost like you go to the reference of the Lion King, the circle of life. From United's perspective, because half our business is refining and half our business is product, we are a big circle of life of the jewelry industry. So what happens is 85% of our customer base, and we have a customer base of over 30,000 people, 30,000 accounts. What happens is 90% of them do both parts of the business with us. So what happens is it's great. The passion comes up because we're always dealing with something. Like there's no one that we can't sell or do business with. And to be honest with you, from United's perspective, and I've known Chuck now probably for like 25 years, there's a lot of great people in this industry.
Yeah.
So what happens is, and the best part about this industry, you might not see someone for 6 months or a year, but literally you could pick up on the conversation you left off with.
Yep.
Because what happens is people in the jewelry industry are always looking for stability. They're looking for stability. So if you can find partners that have been around for a long time and have that experience, I think what happens, that's what builds the relationship and the friendship and the business relationship.
Beautiful.
Great. Well, Dave, thank you
pleasure.
very much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for explaining this to the industry.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for listening to the Pearls of Wisdom Jewelry Podcast. For more information about the show, please visit southernjewelrynews.com/podcast, brought to you by Southern Jewelry News and Jewelry Store Marketers. Make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so you can catch the next show. See you then.